Reach your destination.
Yeah, it's amazing. But Hugh McShane's with me, the historian, the writer of books on history, a great man, former, well, a retired schoolmaster out of that august establishment of educational wonderment, the Sacred Heart. It's a good school and always has been. When did you retire?
I retired in 2011.
Wow.
That was after 39 years role.
39 years.
Started in 1972 in Castle Street.
Yeah.
And then in 1985 we moved out to the present site in Ashgrove.
I had almost forgotten the Sacred Heart was ever on Castle Street, because when I was in the Abbey a very long time ago, 50 years ago, we used to have the Sacred Heart Bend. And the Sacred Heart Bend was the time of the sports. The track would take us around the Sacred Heart Bend.
Yeah.
And I always remember in my days of running, the dock, Brother Doherty, was on the loud hailer. And he was calling out. I was coming around the Sacred Heart Bend in the 880, and I was coming to the lead. And the doc said, "And it's Shawnee McGuigan going into the lead." Even in my success, he couldn't sort of say, "That's right." But I've forgotten that Sacred. Yeah. Now, did the writing sort of come on you as a storm once you retired, or were you always writing books?
No, I suppose it really came about because when I retired, I was asked to do some talks on history in U3A, and I started from that, and then after that it really took its own momentum. And people would have asked me at the talks, do I have any literature on it? Have I written anything on it? So the booklets really came from accompanying the talks. So they've developed from that.
Yeah, and the latest one here, Newry and the Great War, you know, it's a compendium of great names, Newry names. Ferran, Bannon, Fitzpatrick, McAteer, Lundy, you know, it's Charles Fagan. Like, where does a man go? I suppose I should know the answer to this, having been in journalism all my life. But where does a man go to garner all this kind of information? Where did you start?
Well, where I started really was looking at the census. If you're looking at the First World War, the census of 1901 and the census of 1911 give a great background to the individual. I felt that when I was writing about young Newry men who joined up during the war, that I wanted to give a more rounded picture.
Yes.
There are memorials, there is memorabilia, but I wanted to give the human face to some of these young men. So you can get it through looking at their background, their home situation, and as well as that, all of the men who feature in that left wills.
Yes.
And the National Archives in Dublin retain those wills in digital form. So that's a great way to see something else about them.
Hugh,
as well.
was the will situation, was that a requirement on them by the military when they joined?
It was, yes.
Not that they would have had that much to leave.
No, absolutely not. And it would have been very unusual for a young working man to make a will.
Yes, of course.
But there was a requirement before they went into active service to make a will, so that there wasn't any difficulty about back pay and whatever money they had
and they
left.
say here, for young, this is under the thing, wills, for young soldiers, the prospect of impending death, whilst, as one young man reflected, still in the prime of life, must have impacted on them greatly as they undertook the task. And in many cases, their last exercise in written communication was their will, you know.
Yeah.
Do you sense that these were a band of tragic heroes, because they were going to their death in almost all cases? They were heroes, but what tragedy, if you like, took them into the uniform?
Well, there were a number of reasons really why young men joined up. Some of them, as you can see from individuals in the book, some of them were influenced by the politicians of the day, like Carson, who promoted enlistment as the opportunity to make sure that after the war, Ulster would still remain within the Union. Redmond, on the other hand, would have said that if young Irish nationals went off to fight in the war, the reward would be home rule for Ireland.
Yes.
So there was an element for some of the soldiers of a political motivation, but the vast majority of them, Rowan, were simply young men who were looking either for a challenge or for an increase in wages, because a lot of the young men did work in fairly badly paid jobs and mundane jobs. So there was the economic motive as well.
There from the wheel, 6284, Private Doran, in the event of my death, leave all my pay and belongings to Mrs. Doran, 32 Boat Street, Newry, Ireland. Francis Doran, A Company, the Royal Irish Rifles. It's quite poignant, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
I think there's a great poignancy about it. Yeah. And a lot of the young men came from a certain sort of group of streets. You had Boat Street, River Street, Chapel Street.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of town, you would have had Cecil Street, Catherine Street, Doran's Hill, and that kind of thing.
They would have had, the other side of the street would have had the influence of the barracks and Lidenhall Square, which was a headquarters for military people in those days.
Right. Yeah, it would have been.
Absolutely.
So there was certainly a military tradition in Ireland. I think I said to you the last time that many young Irishmen fought in the Crimean War, fought at Waterloo, fought in the Boer War in South Africa. So there was a very strong tradition. Yes. And joining the army then was not a political issue as it became after 1916.
There's P.J. Lundy, the Rosary postcard, and there's the front of it. And there he's pictured in Malta.
That's right, 1916. Yeah, he was well travelled actually.
Yes,
he was in Malta, he was in the Western Front, he was also in Salonika, so he did get around.
He did indeed, and a great Newry name. It's so well known in Newry.
Actually, there's an interesting story around P.J. Lundy, because when I was researching him, he signed his will as Jail Lundy.
Yes.
And the only Jail Lundy I could find in the census was John Lundy, who was his brother.
Yes.
But just before we went to print, a lady from Derelicky called Mary McKenna contacted me.
Yes.
And actually it was very significant, because she said, no, it wasn't John, it was PJ.
Wow.
So you can get in official records inaccuracies that people who are related, he was an uncle of hers actually, can actually rectify.
Were there things occurred, or was there a single thing that occurred that was a eureka moment for you in pulling this together, that you said, wow, this is blowing me away?
I think when I looked at the wills on National Archives, because so many of the wills were letters home.
Yes.
Because if the will was lost in battle, then a letter home which contained a statement like, by the way, Mother, I'm leaving everything to you.
Wow.
And those letters give a tremendous insight into the individual. And I think it was President Higgins who said during the year, when he was talking about the commemoration of the First World War, he said, to be forgotten is to die twice.
Yes, of course. Yes.
And that really, in a sense, motivated me to put a human face on these young men who died. And many of them, really, for no political motives.
No, indeed. But the political dynamic would have still been there between Britain and Ireland. There would still be the tension. Would there have been any overt opposition to these young men getting involved from, say, the clergy and people like that? Did they have a current to swim against?
Yeah, there was. I think it's fair to say that the arguments of Carson and Redmond carried most young men who did sign up.
Yes.
But there was a movement within Ireland that was very much both anti-conscription and anti-war.
Yes.
The trade unions, for example, were totally opposed to Ireland being involved in the war. They said it wasn't Ireland's war. And
was it Ireland's opportunity, though? Did it turn out to be that?
Well, in the sense of the 1916 Rising, the leaders of the Rising obviously would have seen it as an opportunity to exploit England's difficulty.
Yeah.
There's no question about that.
And then as the thing went ahead, these men, those who came home successfully, few enough perhaps, were they treated as heroes back in Uri, or how were they received back?
Well, when they were leaving, there were brass bands, there was cheering, there was a lot of support.
Yeah.
When they came back, essentially, they were in the wrong uniform, especially after 1916.
Of course.
And most of them really kept their heads down. They weren't welcomed back as heroes by any means. Certainly in parts of Belfast, where the Ulster Volunteer Force would have been located, there was celebration, there was a sense that they were heroes. But within the nationalist community, those who survived were not necessarily regarded as heroes.
Yes. It's interesting now. I remember a long time ago at the foundation of the Alliance Party, Patrick Riddle, who wrote Fire Over Ulster, about the Ulster Regiment and what they did and all of that. But it became increasingly clear in that to me in those early times that there was a unity of people who wanted to go. Both Catholics and Protestants went and fought, and we've heard this said before. But were they really, I wonder, Catholic and Protestant heroes being led by British military donkeys, as is often said, and that these young men, altruistic as they were, or for whatever reason, that they were going there to die in the most illogical of circumstances? They shouldn't have been there at all, maybe.
Well, certainly, I don't think anybody, including the politicians in the military, believed that the war would last for 4 years. I think at the most they expected it to be 6 months. Yeah. And I think we have to remember too that this was 1914. We have social media today which gives us instant access to information. I suppose you see that with the recent plane crash this morning in Malaysia.
Yes, indeed.
But in 1914, access to information about what was really happening on the Western Front would have been very limited. So these young men would have been going off expecting adventure, expecting danger, but certainly not expecting the enormous brutality and carnage that was to meet them.
Yeah, isn't it extraordinary? And we've been documenting it over the Christmas period, the truce, the Stille Nacht and Silent Night and the football. In the midst of such brutality and carnage, these men went back to killing again. They went back into the trenches, and it was President, I think, former President McAleese, who said over the same period of time, she was doing a lecture in Dublin, I think, she said that our challenge now is, having come out of the trenches and greeted each other in the modern conflict, that we don't, like the young men who died in 1914, 1916, that we don't go back into the trenches again. And that was her feeling and her belief and her prayer that that would be the case. But what does it tell you about the human spirit? The historian, as with a human spirit and knowing the human spirit, what does it tell you about the brutality on the one hand, the capacity to stand aside from the brutality for a moment and then to return? What does that say about us as a people? We're capable of anything, really.
In certain circumstances, probably everybody is capable of a dastardly deed. I suppose the one positive feature from the First World War was that people began to understand that sometimes young people can be led into very difficult situations because of their lack of knowledge about the motives of the politicians and the military. There's no question about that. But it's interesting that the Great War was supposed to be the war to end all wars, and yet 20 years later we had an even greater conflict with the Second World War.
After payment of my just debts and funeral expenses, I give my mother, Annie Burns, 16 Bells Row, Newry, for her sole and separate use, her receipt alone being sufficient discharge, the whole of my estate and my effects, and everything that I can by law dispose of, and I appoint my uncle Philip Turley of 18 Bridge Street, executor of my will. it's domestic, it's close. There's some Robert McKee. He was killed in action in France or Belgium, and he was age 23. Yeah.
And he wrote an interesting letter as well, Rowan. I think it's over the page.
Yes, he did. Dear Aunt, and he's writing from Woolwich. That's presumably the regimental headquarters. Dear Aunt, just a line in answer to your letter. Hoping this will find you all well at home. Well, as regards myself, we have just been mobilized here for the last week and are waiting every minute to move off to the coast. We are for the war, of that I am sure, but I don't think you need worry about me. But in case I don't come back, anything belonging to me will come to you as my next of kin. Don't let this upset you. Things are not nearly so bad as they are painted, and the only thing would worry me is if they did not let us go over, but there is no fear of that as we move over with the first expeditionary force. Well, Aunt, there really is not much to tell you this time, only don't pay any attention to any rumors you may hear, as there are lots of false rumors floating about. All true news will be published by the War Office. I must now close, as we are rather hurried, with my best wishes to all at home from your affectionate nephew, Bobby. When you write again, send the letter to Woolwich. If we have gone, they will send it to us. Did he survive?
No, he didn't survive. But again, the interesting thing is about a lot of the communications. They weren't saying either I love home rule or I love the Union. No. They were saying I love you, the family. That was their real interest.
And you sense here the absence of a political motivation. There is, I think you alluded to it earlier, there is the notion of adventure, of wanting to be going, just to do it.
Yes, that's right.
Born out of perhaps not courage, but maybe the boredom of the Newry of those days and the poor jobs that were about.
That's right.
You know.
And it's interesting too that Newry in 1914 was a fairly integrated society. You see from the records that a lot of the young men, Protestant and Catholic, lived in the same streets, joined the same regiments. So there was that sense of social integration within society in Newry in those days.
Is the work done? Is this it? That's the end of it? Where do you go next?
Well, the next is the 1916 Rising, actually. That's the next in the series.
Yes.
There's a series
Is it published yet? No?
Of 10. No,
it's coming.
Hopefully in January.
The 16 Rising, that's huge.
16 Rising,
My goodness. You're well through it, are you? It's print ready.
Pretty much. Well, I wouldn't say it, but that'll come, hopefully.
The fiendish thing is deciding when it's done.
That's right.
When do I leave it alone?
Yeah.
Walk away from it. I have this experience. My work on Caritas et Amor, in the footsteps of love, the work of the SMA fathers in Africa and India. It's a huge tome. It's done. It's ready to go. Can't be printed at the moment for security reasons, for my people are in Africa. One doesn't want, in any sense, however unintentional, the work to be used as a roadmap for terrorism. And one needs to be careful of that. But in the interim, waiting to decide on it's ready to go. It's in the PDF, I think the publishers call it, ready to go. But in the interim, waiting for printing, you keep going back and reading again. Oh, will I change that? But that. It's very hard to sign it off and say that's done.
That's right. I think you have to make a decision at some point,
and stand away.
And I think that's what I've tried to do with that. But there's always new information coming forward, and hopefully from today's program, there will be people who will have information that maybe could be included in an updated version.
The 1916 work that you're involved in, already the commemoration's causing a bit of a hoo-ha, and that's the relatives talking about how all of that's going. How does one commemorate as an historian? How would you advise government or whoever, this is how you should commemorate on the basis of history? How would you do it?
Well, I think you always work from the basis that any significant event is fraught with controversy.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. There are many different points of view in every event, including the 1916 Rising. I always feel, my approach has always been that memorialization and commemoration is fine, but I think analysis is very important.
Yeah.
It's very important to try and analyze in as balanced a way as you can the events at the time. Sometimes we make the mistake of looking at events from the present.
Yes.
We use hindsight, I think, too much in order to analyze and to comment on events. I think you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the people at the time.
Yeah.
And that's very clear from the First World War, that at the time people had a certain perspective, and you've got to respect that.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with the 1916 Rising.
Absolutely, and I think really the true memorial is drawing out of the experience that which will enhance the present and lead us into a better future. And it's not about the marching feet of commemorative roar. It's not about that. I don't know how it'll all work out. You'll come to us again, won't you, when you the next... Well, how do you do your writing? Have you a garret, or do you do it at the kitchen table, or what happens?
Tom Kelly, you know Tom Kelly,
Tom,
I'm sure.
Of course.
Tom has chided me in the past about my headquarters, which is really the garden shed.
No better place. No better place.
But sometimes I go out there when I need a bit of peace and calm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other times I just write by hand and then transfer.
That's interesting, you write by hand.
Yeah.
You do it twice.
That's how I start.
Yeah. But is that a kind of editing experience?
It
you
is.
Do it by hand, first of all, and then you're refining it.
It is.
Yeah.
I think by doing something by hand means that there's something of you going into it. And your own particular style.
You obviously haven't hit the arthritic thumbs yet.
Not quite yet, no, just the arthritic back.
Oh my God, yeah. No, that's all good. So listen, how did you manage to get retirement from the Sacred Heart? You're far too young looking to be that. You're fit, but you run still. You keep healthy.
Yeah. Well, I had been there for nearly 40 years.
But it don't seem a day too long as far as you're concerned, because you loved it.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Really enjoyed it. But I do think when you retire, I think it's important, first of all, to have a challenge, to have something else to stretch you.
Presumably golf wouldn't meet that requirement.
It's true.
The quiet way says true.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Your lips hardly moved when you said you spoke.
Yeah.
So the books and all that goes with. But of course, you have an ongoing and constant interest in St. Vincent de Paul in Newry, and those are great people. You've done great things this Christmas.
Fantastic.
Well done.
Yes, and of course we could do nothing without their tremendous generosity. That's another feature of Newry people that's always been there. You know that too.
Yes, absolutely.
And the generosity of Newry people is tremendous, and it keeps St. Vincent de Paul going, really.
But I mean, the real courage of Vincent's is that, it's... anytime I have been away doing anything, I've had the joy of the sunshine on my shoulders out in the missionary fields or wherever. I've been doing that. And but you guys, come hell or high water, every Monday or every Wednesday, whatever night it is, you go out and you get up from hearth and home and you get out there and you do it. That's a big... you've been doing that since Frederick started the thing all those years ago. That's
right.
Been constant. Yeah. It's a huge reservoir of goodness there.
But
that allows that to happen.
I think the great thing about it is that the reception that we get when we visit people is tremendous.
Yeah.
And there's a great reward in meeting people and understanding their situation and being able to help them.
Hugh, long may you continue to do it. It's hugely important and gives great expression to the notion of caritas et amor Deus ibi est, where charity and love are, there you find God. Keep going.
Okay,
Hugh
thank you
McShane,
very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We have books here for you. We will keep, we'll over the course of the next week, we'll make sure you get these. Okay. Thanks, Hugh. Take care.
Thank you.
Destination Newry. Keep it on. We're back in moments.